Get your trash out of my sight." Beatrice slapped the sketchbook from Alia's hands, scattering drawings across the pristine, first-class carpet. "Security, remove this brat." The flight attendant loomed over the 17-year-old, threatening to drag her to economy in zip ties. To them, Alia was just a helpless charity case in a hoodie. They were too blinded by prejudice to notice the text she just sent. "Dad, they're hurting me." Beatrice didn't know the private jet idling next to them belonged to Alia's father, Marcus Thorne. She had no idea the man sprinting down the jet bridge wasn't airport security. He was the airline's new owner, coming to fire them all. The automatic doors of JFK International Airport slid open, greeting 17-year-old Alia Thorne with a blast of conditioned air and the chaotic symphony of travelers. It was a sound she usually associated with stress, long lines, crying babies, the frantic search for gate numbers. But not today. Today was different. Alia adjusted the strap of her modest beige canvas backpack. It wasn't a designer bag like the ones draped over the arms of the women rushing past her in the priority lane, but it held everything that mattered. Her sketchbook, her noise-cancelling headphones, and the ticket that felt heavy in her pocket. First-class seat 1A. She still couldn't quite believe it. Her father, Marcus Thorne, had surprised her with it the night before. "I have to fly in from the Singapore summit a few hours late." He had told her over FaceTime, his face pixelated, but his smile warm. "But I don't want you waiting for me in the lobby. I booked you on the commercial flight ahead of the team first class. Treat yourself to the sparkling cider and draw something beautiful. Okay, I'll meet you in Zurich for the gala." Marcus Thorne wasn't just a businessman. He was a titan of industry, the CEO of Thor Global, a conglomerate that had its hands in everything from sustainable energy to logistics. But despite his billions, he had raised Alia to be humble. They lived quietly. She went to a public high school. She worked a summer job at a library. Most people had no idea that the quiet girl with the braids and the sketchbook was the heirs to an empire. And she liked it that way. Approaching the check-in counter for Aurora Airways, Alia felt a familiar knot of anxiety. She knew how she looked to the world. She was a black teenager, in a hoodie and jeans wearing scuffed Converse. In the glossy high-fashion world of international first-class travel, she was an anomaly. Next, the agent called out without looking up. Alia stepped forward, placing her passport and digital boarding pass on the counter. "Good morning," she said softly. The agent, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Patricia, glanced at Alia, then down at the screen. Her eyebrows shot up. She typed something furiously, then looked at Alia again, her expression shifting from indifference to suspicion. "Ticket for one." Patricia asked, her tone dry. "Yes, Mum. And you're traveling alone?" "Yes. My father is meeting me in Switzerland." Patricia hummed a sound that conveyed zero confidence in Alia's story. She picked up the passport, examining the photo, then the girl, then the photo again. She held it up to the light as if looking for a forgery. "Is there a problem?" Alia asked, her heart beginning to thump against her ribs. "Just standard procedure," Miss Patricia said, though the way she tapped her fingernails on the desk suggested otherwise. After a long, agonizing minute, the computer beeped green. Patricia sighed, seemingly disappointed. "Fine, you're clear. The lounge is to your right, past security." "Thank you," Alia said, taking her documents back. She didn't let the woman's skepticism sting her. She was used to it. She just wanted to get to her seat, put on her headphones, and disappear into her art. She made her way through the exclusive security lane, ignoring the lingering stars from a businessman in a grey suit who looked at her like she was lost. She kept her head high. Dad worked hard for this, she reminded herself. I belong here just as much as anyone else. When she finally boarded the massive Boeing 7, the shift in atmosphere was instant. The air smelled of expensive perfume and leather. The lighting was soft, amber-hued, calming. "Welcome aboard," a flight attendant said. Her name tag read Sarah. She was tall, blonde, and wore the Aurora Airways uniform, a navy blazer with gold trim, with a crisp, practiced perfection. Her smile was bright, but it didn't reach her eyes when she saw Aaliyah. "Boarding pass," Sarah asked, her hand extended, blocking the aisle. Aaliyah showed her the phone screen. 1A. Sarah's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She blinked, looking at the screen, then back at the teenager. 1A. Are you sure you didn't mean Levan Economy Plus is back that way? It says 1A Aaliyah, said politely, zooming in on the screen. First class, Sarah let out a short, airy laugh, as if Aaliyah had told a cute joke. Right, well, go ahead then. Don't block the aisle. She stepped aside, her eyes scanning Aaliyah's backpack as she passed, looking for something to criticize. Aaliyah didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. She walked to the very front, to the spacious, pod-like seat that was more like a small apartment than an airplane chair. She stowed her bag, sat down, and exhaled. The leather was buttery soft. There was a fresh orchid in a vase on the console. It was perfect. She pulled out her sketchbook and charcoal pencils, ready to lose herself in the quiet before takeoff. She didn't know that the quiet was about to be shattered. The cabin was filling up. Aaliyah was sketching the curve of the window frame, blocking out the world, when a commotion at the front of the plane broke her concentration. "I don't care what the system says. I explicitly requested the bulkhead. I need the legroom for my sciatica." The voice was shrill, piercing, and undeniably entitled. Aaliyah glanced up. Standing in the entryway of the first-class cabin was a woman who looked like she had been cut out of a magazine about terrifyingly wealthy socialites. She was wearing a white faux fur coat, despite the warm temperature oversized sunglasses, and was dragging a Louis Vuitton carry-on that likely cost more than Aaliyah's entire wardrobe. This was Beatrix Vanderwall. Beatrice was a woman who had never heard the word no in her life without immediately asking to speak to a manager. Behind her trailed a meek-looking husband who seemed to be trying to shrink into his own suit to avoid the embarrassment. Sarah, the flight attendant, was nodding frantically, her customer service mask straining to stay in place. "Of course, Mrs. Vanderwall, we value your status as a Diamond Elite member. Let me just check the seating chart. I don't want you to check," Beatrice snapped, pushing her sunglasses onto her head to reveal icy blue eyes heavily lined with makeup. "I want to sit down. My husband and I always take row 1. It's tradition." Sarah looked at her tablet, then nervously toward the front of the cabin. Her eyes landed on Areale. Aaliyah felt a cold prickle on the back of her neck. She looked down at her sketchbook, praying she would become invisible. "Mrs. Vanderwall," Sarah whispered, though it was a stage whisper clearly meant to be heard. "It appears seat 1A is currently occupied." Occupied. Beatrix's head snapped toward Aaliyah's pod. She narrowed her eyes. Occupied by whom? Beatrice marched down the short aisle, her heels thudding with purpose. She stopped right next to Aaliyah's seat. Aaliyah could smell her perfume, something heavy, musky, and expensive. "Excuse me," Beatrice said, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. Aaliyah lowered her headphones. "Yes, you're in my seat." Aaliyah blinked. She checked her phone again just to be absolutely sure. "I don't think so, Mum. My ticket says 1A. This is 1A." Beatrix let out a scoff that sounded like a bark. She turned to Sarah, who had hurried up behind her. "Sarah, is it Explain to me why there is a child sitting in my seat. And why is she dressed like that? She gestured vaguely at Alia's hoodie. Sarah clasped her hands together. I'm sorry, Mrs. Vanderwaal. There must be a system error. Let me handle this. Sarah turned to Alia. The fake smile was gone. Her face was hard, her eyes cold. Miss, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again. I already showed it to you, Alia said, her voice trembling slightly. It's 1A. Show me, Sarah demanded, snapping her fingers. Alia held up her phone. Sarah snatched it from her hand, scrolling through the details aggressively. She frowned. The ticket was valid. Fully paid. Full fare. Well, Beatrice demanded, tapping her foot. Get her out of there. My husband and I need to sit together, and I refuse to sit in row 2 near the galley. It's too noisy. Sarah looked at the ticket, then at the wealthy, furious woman who was a Diamond Elite member, and then at the young black girl flying alone. In Sarah's mind, the calculation was simple. One of these passengers could get her fired with a single phone call. The other was probably an upgrade mistake, an employee non-rev, or a contest winner. Nobody important. There seems to be a double booking, Sarah lied smoothly, handing the phone back to Alia. Double booking, Alia asked. But I have a seat number. Yes, but Mrs. Vanderwaal is a priority member, Sarah said, her voice taking on that condescending tone adults use with toddlers. And since this is a full flight, we have to prioritize our frequent flyers. I'm going to need you to gather your things. What Alia's grip on her sketchbook tightened. Where am I supposed to go? We have a lovely seat available in economy, Sarah said. Row 34. It's an aisle seat, no, Alia said firmly. The blood was rushing to her ears. My father paid for this seat. I'm not moving. The cabin went silent. The businessman across the aisle lowered his newspaper. Beatrice's mouth dropped open. Excuse me. Beatrice gasped. Did you just say no? I said no. Alia repeated, though her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might explode. I have a ticket. I have a right to be here. Beatrix turned to Sarah, her face turning a blotchy red. Are you going to let this little hoodlum talk to me like that? I spend $50,000 a year with this airline. Do you know who my husband is? He knows the vice president of operations. Sarah panicked. She couldn't let a Diamond Elite member make a scene. She leaned into Alia's personal space, her voice dropping to a menacing hiss. Listen to me, Sarah said. You are causing a disturbance. You are upsetting our premium passengers. If you do not get up right now, I will have the ground crew escort you off the plane, and you won't be flying to Zurich at all. Is that what you want? Alia looked at Sarah's name tag then, up into her eyes. She saw no empathy there, only annoyance. I'm not causing a disturbance, Alia said, her voice shaking. I'm sitting in my seat. Last chance, Sarah said, straightening up and crossing her arms. Move to 34C or get off the plane. Alia looked around the cabin. There were 10 other people in first class. Most were looking away, pretending to be absorbed in their phones or magazines. They didn't want to get involved. They just wanted the plane to take off, except for one man in 2A, the businessman in the grey suit. He frowned, looking like he wanted to say something. But Beatrice shot him a glare that could cut glass, and he hesitated. I'm waiting, Beatrice said, looming over Alia. My legs are hurting. Move it. Tears stung the corners of Alia's eyes. She felt small, humiliated. She knew she was right, but she also knew that if they kicked her off the plane, she would be stranded in New York while her dad waited in Zurich. He would be worried. It would ruin his big night. Don't cry, she told herself. Dad says Thorn women don't cry in the boardroom. This is a boardroom. Slowly, Alia zipped up her backpack. She stood up. Finally, Beatrice huffed. Takes forever. Sarah smirked, a look of triumphant satisfaction on her face. I'll take your bag to the back for you. There's no overhead space left in economy. I'll keep my bag, Aaliyah said quietly. She stepped out into the aisle. Beatrice immediately brushed past her, practically shoving her hip into our lay to get to the seat. She threw her fur coat onto the leather Aaliyah had just vacated and sat down with a dramatic sigh of relief. Wipe down the armrests, Sarah, Beatrice commanded. God knows where she's been. Aaliyah felt like she had been slapped. She stood in the aisle, the shame burning her cheeks. Sarah pointed toward the back of the plane, past the curtain that separated the rich from the rest. Go on, Sarah shooed her. Aaliyah began the long walk. It felt like a walk of shame. She passed through the business-class cabin where people glanced up curiously. Then she passed the curtain into economy. The aisles were narrow, the air felt stuffier, and the noise was louder. She found row 34. It was right next to the toilets. The seat 34C was squeezed between a man who was already asleep and snoring, and the beverage cart that was currently parked in the aisle. Aaliyah sat down. The seat didn't recline. The legroom was non-existent. She hugged her backpack to her chest, burying her face in the rough canvas. She wanted to scream. She wanted to call her dad. She pulled out her phone. No signal. They had closed the cabin doors. The plane was pushing back from the gate. Back in first class, Beatrice was sipping a glass of champagne that Sarah had hurriedly poured for her. Much better, Beatrice said, clinking her glass against her husband's. Honestly, the airline needs to screen people better. That girl looked like she belonged on a Greyhound bus, not a 777. Sarah chuckled, leaning in. I apologize again, Mrs. Vannell. I'll make sure to file a report about the booking error. We'll make sure you get extra miles for the inconvenience. See that you do, Beatrice said, settling back. Now bring me some warm nuts. Sarah hurried off to the galley, feeling proud of herself. She had diffused a volatile situation, pleased a high-value customer, and kept the flight on schedule. She was a problem solver. She was efficient. She picked up the interphone to call the captain. Cabin secure, Captain. Ready for taxi. But as the plane began to taxi toward the runway, a sleek black limousine tore across the tarmac, flanked by 2 airport security vehicles with flashing lights. In the cockpit, the pilot frowned. Tower, this is Aurora 402. We're holding short. There are vehicles blocking our path. Aurora 402, hold position. The tower crackled back. We have an emergency stop order. Do not, I repeat, do not take off. In the back of the plane, Aaliyah felt the plane shudder to a halt. The fastened seatbelt sign flickered. A crackle over the PA system. The pilot's voice sounded confused. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We've been ordered to return to the gate immediately. It seems there is a security issue regarding a passenger in seat 1A. Beatrice rolled her eyes. Oh, great. Probably that girl caused a security threat. I knew she was trouble. Sarah nodded in agreement. I bet you're right. Don't worry. We'll get her off and be on our way. The plane turned around, but it didn't go back to the commercial terminal. It taxied to a private standoff area where a set of stairs was being wheeled out. The door opened. It wasn't the police who walked in. It was a man in a bespoke Italian suit, 6'3", with broad shoulders and a face that was currently a mask of barely contained fury. He didn't look like a passenger. He looked like a king arriving to an execution. Sarah, standing in the galley, felt her stomach drop. She recognized that face. She had seen it in the orientation videos. She had seen it on the cover of Forbes in the Seat Pocket magazine. It was Marcus Thorne, the owner of the private equity firm that had just bought a 51% controlling stake in Aurora Airways 3 days ago, and he looked ready to burn the plane down. The silence that fell over the Boeing 757 was absolute. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of a predator entering a clearing. The engines had spooled down to a low hum. The air conditioning vents hissed softly, but every human sound had ceased. Sarah, the flight attendant, who had felt so powerful just moments ago, felt a tremor start in her hands. She stood at the front of the galley, clutching a coffee pot she had been about to use, staring at the open cabin door. Marcus Thorne stepped onto the aircraft. He didn't stomp. He didn't yell. He moved with the terrifying silent grace of a sleek black panther. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than most people's cars, tailored to perfection, emphasizing the width of his shoulders and the rigid posture of a man who carried empires on his back. Behind him was a man with a shaved head and an earpiece. Elias, his head of personal security, who looked like he could bench press the beverage cart. The captain, a seasoned pilot named Miller, had stepped out of the cockpit, looking bewildered. "Sir," Captain Miller started putting a hand up. "This is a secure aircraft. You can't just—" Marcus didn't even look at him. He simply held up a hand, a single finger extended, and Captain Miller's voice died in his throat. It was a gesture of absolute authority. "My name is Marcus Thorne," he said. His voice was a deep baritone, calm but vibrating with an undercurrent of violence. "I am the CEO of Thorne Global. As of Tuesday, I am the majority shareholder of Aurora Airways." The blood drained from Sarah's face so fast it left her looking like a ghost. She dropped the coffee pot. It shattered on the floor, splashing hot liquid over her pristine shoes. But she didn't flinch. She couldn't feel her feet. Thorne. Every employee had received the email memo 3 days ago. The acquisition was big news. They had been told the new owner was strict, exacting, and valued excellence. They hadn't been told he would be boarding Flight 402 from the tarmac. Mr. Thorne," Sarah stammered, her throat clicking dry. We weren't expecting." Marcus ignored her. He stepped fully into the first-class cabin, his eyes scanning the space like a laser grid. He wasn't looking for the staff. He was looking for one specific face. His eyes landed on seat 1A. Beatrix van der Rohe was still sitting there, a flute of champagne halfway to her mouth. She had lowered her sunglasses to get a better look at the handsome intruder. She didn't know who he was, and because she was Beatrix van der Rohe, she assumed his arrival was simply an inconvenience to her schedule. Finally, Beatrice drawled, swirling her drink. "Are you with security?" "Good. I want to file a formal complaint about the delay. This is unacceptable. We've been sitting on the tarmac for 20 minutes. Marcus stared at her. His expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He looked at the seat he had personally selected for his daughter, because it had the best view of the horizon. He looked at the woman occupying it, a woman draped in fur radiating entitlement. Then he looked at the empty space where his daughter should have been. He turned to Sarah. The movement was slow, deliberate. "Where is she?" Sarah trembled. "So, sir, my daughter," Marcus said, enunciating every syllable. "Aaliyah Thorne, seat 1A. I booked this seat myself. I received a text from her 5 minutes ago, saying she was being harassed. Now I walk on, and I see a stranger in her seat." He took a step closer to Sarah. She backed up until she hit the galley wall. "So I will ask you one time and one time only," Marcus whispered, and the sound was more terrifying than a scream. "Where is my daughter?" Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She looked frantically at Beatrice, then back at Marcus. The realization of what she had done crashed over her like a tidal wave. The hoodlum she had kicked to the back. The nobody. There was a double booking. Sarah lied, her voice shaking uncontrollably. A conflict with a Diamond Elite member. "I don't care about Diamond Elite," Marcus cut her off. "I own the diamond mine." "Where is she?" Sarah pointed a shaking finger toward the back of the plane. "Economy," she whispered. "Row 34. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. A flash of pure, unadulterated pain crossed his face, followed immediately by a rage so intense that the veins in his neck bulged against his collar. "You put my daughter—" He paused, taking a breath to control himself. "You put Aaliyah Thorne in row 34. He turned to Elias. "Hold the plane. Nobody leaves. Nobody moves." "Yes, sir," Elias said, stepping in front of the exit door, crossing his arms. Marcus adjusted his cuffs. "Lead the way," he said to Sarah. "Sus, sir." "Walk," Marcus commanded. "Take me to her." The walk from the front of the plane to the back is usually just a walk, but today it was a procession of judgment. Sarah walked in front, her heels clicking unevenly as she stumbled. Tears were streaming down her face, now ruining her perfect makeup. Behind her walked Marcus Thorne, tall and imposing, his eyes fixed forward. They passed through business class. The passengers there, sensing the tension, pulled their legs in. They watched the man in the three-piece suit march past, radiating power. They reached the curtain separating the classes. Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to open it. She didn't want him to see. "Open it," Marcus said. She pulled the curtain back. The smell hit them first. Economy was packed. It smelled of stale coffee humanity and recycled air. It was loud. Babies were crying. People were complaining about the delay. Marcus stepped into the narrow aisle. He was too broad for it. His shoulders brushed the seats on either side. He looked out of place, a diamond in a cold chute. The passengers went quiet as he passed. They had never seen anyone like him back here. He looked like a movie star or a president. Row 34. Marcus counted under his breath. Row 10. Row 20. Every step was an indictment of the crew. Every row he passed, seeing the cramped conditions, the lack of space, made his anger burn hotter. He wasn't a snob. He had grown up poor, but he had worked 18-hour days for 20 years specifically, so his daughter would never have to feel small. And today, his own employees had made her feel small. They reached the very back of the plane, the area near the toilets. The engine noise was loudest here, and there she was, seat 34C. Aaliyah was curled into a ball, her knees pulled up to her chest as much as the cramped seat allowed. She had her hood up, hiding her face. Her headphones were on, but they weren't playing music. She was just trying to block out the world. She was clutching her backpack like a lifeline. She looked so young, so small. Marcus felt his heart break. He stopped. Sarah stopped beside him, sobbing quietly into her hand. Marcus didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply knelt down in the aisle. He didn't care that the floor was dirty. He didn't care that he was ruining a $5,000 suit. He knelt down so he could be eye level with his daughter. He reached out and gently pulled one side of her headphones away. "Aaliyah," he said softly. Aaliyah flinched. She looked up, her eyes red and puffy, expecting to see the flight attendant coming to yell at her again. When she saw her father, her face crumbled. "Dad!" she whispered, her voice cracking. "What? What are you doing here? I thought you were in Zurich. I came to get you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I tracked your phone. I saw your text. They told me. I stole the seat. Aaliyah cried, the dam breaking. The lady said I was a hoodlum. The flight attendant said she'd call the police if I didn't move. I showed them the ticket. Dad, I promise. I showed them. I know, baby. I know, Marcus said, pulling her into a hug right there in the aisle. He held her tight, shielding her from the stares of the other passengers. You didn't do anything wrong. You handled yourself with dignity. I am so proud of you. He stood up, extending a hand to her. Come on, grab your bag. Where are we going? Aaliyah sniffled, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. They said I have to sit here. Marcus looked at Sarah, who was cowering against the beverage cart. They were wrong, Marcus said, his voice carrying through the silent cabin. You are Aaliyah Thorne. You don't sit in the back unless you choose to. And today we are not choosing to. He took her backpack from her, slinging it over one shoulder. He took her hand firmly in his. Then he turned to the economy cabin. 200 people were watching them. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus said, his voice projecting clearly. I apologize for the delay in your flight. My staff made a grave error in judgment today. They mistook my daughter for someone who could be bullied. We are rectifying that now. Drinks are on the house for the entire duration of the flight. A ripple of applause broke out from a few rows, then spread. People cheered. They didn't know the full story, but they knew a father defending his daughter when they saw one. Marcus turned back to Sarah. His eyes were hard again. Walk, he said. Back to the front. We have business to finish. The procession returned to first class, but the energy was different now. It was a victory march. Aaliyah walked with her head higher, holding her father's hand. She wasn't the scared teenager anymore. She was the daughter of the king. When they stepped back into the first-class cabin, Beatrix Vanderwall was tapping furiously on her phone. Finally, Beatrice snapped without looking up. Is the drama over? Can we take off now? My husband has a meeting. Marcus guided Aaliyah to stand right next to seat 1A. He handed her backpack to Elias. Mrs. Van der Aal, Marcus said. Beatrice looked up, annoyed. What? Who are you? I am the man who owns the seat you are sitting in, Marcus said, and the plane attached to it. Beatrice scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. This is a public airline. Actually, Marcus said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a business card. He dropped it onto her tray table. It landed with a soft thack next to her champagne. It's a privately held subsidiary of Thorne Global. As of this week, Beatrice picked up the card. She read it. Her face went pale. The name Thorne was legendary in socialite circles. It meant money, real money, old money and new money combined. Oh, she said, her voice shrinking. I didn't know. You didn't know she was my daughter, Marcus asked, gesturing to Aaliyah. Or you didn't know that treating a child like garbage would have consequences. I didn't treat her like garbage, Beatrice sputtered, trying to rally her defense. She looked suspicious. She was wearing a hoodie in first class. I was just concerned for the safety of the flight. She is 17, Marcus said coldly. She is an artist, and she was wearing a hoodie because she wanted to be comfortable. Since when does a hoodie negate a valid ticket? He turned to Sarah, who was standing by the cockpit door, looking like she wanted to melt into the floor. And you, Marcus said, you enabled this. You checked her ticket. You saw her name. Did it not occur to you to check the manifest? Did it not occur to you to treat a paying customer with basic respect, regardless of her age or skin color? I was just following protocol for elite members. Sarah wept. Mrs. Vanderwall is a diamond member. Protocol. Marcus laughed, a harsh, humorous sound. Let me tell you about protocol. Protocol is protecting your passengers. Protocol is checking facts before you threaten a minor with police action. He turned back to Beatrice. Get up, Marcus said. Beatrice froze. Excuse me. Get up, he repeated. You are in my daughter's seat, and you are no longer welcome on this aircraft. You can't be serious, Beatrice shrieked. I paid full fare. My husband. Your husband can stay if he wants, Marcus said, glancing at the man in 1B. The husband immediately shook his head, terrified. But you are off now. I will sue you, Beatrice screamed, standing up, her face purple with rage. I will sue this airline into the ground. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, Marcus said calmly. And I know exactly what you did. You bullied a child because you thought she was weak. You thought she was alone. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Beatrice and Aaliyah could hear. You made a mistake, Beatrice. You judged a book by its cover. But you forgot to check who published it. He motioned to Elias. Escort Mrs. Vanderwall off the plane. Ensure her luggage is removed. And Elias, so flag her passport in our system. Marcus said she is placed on the permanent no-fly list for Aurora Airways and all our partner carriers. She will never step foot on one of my planes again. Not today. Not ever. Beatrice gasped. A permanent ban. That would hurt travel. You can't do that, she wailed as Elias stepped forward, his massive frame blocking her view. I just did, Marcus said. And if you don't start walking, I will have the airport police, who are waiting at the bottom of the stairs, arrest you for disorderly conduct and interfering with a flight crew. Your choice. Beatrice looked at the open door. She looked at Elias. She looked at the other passengers, who were now watching with undisguised glee. The businessman in 2A actually smirked at her. She grabbed her fur coat. She grabbed her bag. This isn't over. She hissed at Aaliyah as she passed. Aaliyah didn't flinch this time. She looked Beatrice in the eye. It looks over to me, Aaliyah said softly. Beatrice stormed out her heels, clacking angrily on the jet bridge, her humiliated husband trailing behind her like a lost puppy. The cabin was silent again. Marcus turned to Sarah. She was shaking so hard she had to lean against the wall. Sarah, Marcus said. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was just disappointed, which was almost worse. Please, Mr. Thorne, she begged. I've been with the airline for 10 years. I have a mortgage. Please. Marcus looked at her. He looked at the shattered coffee pot on the floor. You made a choice, Sarah. You chose prejudice over policy. You chose bullying over service. Aaliyah told me you smirked at her. You enjoyed it. Sarah lowered her head, sobbing. She couldn't deny it. I cannot trust you with the safety and dignity of my passengers. Marcus said, Pack your bag. You are relieved of duty effective immediately. But who will work the flight? She whispered. I will have a reserve crew brought in, Marcus said. It will take another hour. But I would rather wait an hour than have you serve my daughter or anyone else ever again. Sarah nodded slowly. She knew it was over. She grabbed her purse from the crew locker. She didn't look at Aaliyah as she walked off the plane. The shame was too heavy. Marcus let out a long breath. He turned to Aaliyah. The anger vanished from his face, replaced by a warm, fatherly smile. Sat 1A is available, he said, gesturing to the pod. I believe it belongs to you. Aaliyah looked at the seat. Then she looked at her dad. She stepped forward and hugged him again, burying her face in his suit jacket. Thank you, Daddy, she whispered. Always, he said, kissing the top of her head. Now sit down. Put your headphones on. I have to go talk to the pilot and get a new crew here. But I'm not leaving. I'm taking the jump seat in the cockpit for the flight to Zurich. You are? Aaliyah smiled. I'm not letting you out of my sight until we land, he promised. Aaliyah sat down. Sat. The leather was still warm, but the bad energy was gone. She put her backpack down. She pulled out her sketchbook. She watched out the window as a police car drove Beatrix Vanderwall away from the plane. She watched as Sarah walked across the tarmac. Her shoulders slumped her career over. Aaliyah picked up her charcoal pencil. She turned to a fresh page. She didn't draw the horizon. She began to draw a portrait of her father. Standing in the aisle, a giant among men. For the next 50 minutes, while the plane sat on the tarmac, waiting for the replacement crew to be rushed from standby at JFK, the atmosphere inside Flight 402 was one of surreal suspended animation. Aaliyah was back in seat 1A. The physical space was identical. The same buttery leather, the same orchid in the vase. But the feeling had changed completely. It no longer felt like a treat. It felt like a fortress she had successfully defended. She didn't open her sketchbook right away. Her hands were still trembling slightly. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. She just stared out the window at the ground crew, loading luggage, watching the heat haze shimmer off the asphalt. A shadow fell across her aisle. It was the man from seat 2A, the businessman in the expensive grey suit who had sat quietly while Beatrice berated her. His name, according to the tag on his briefcase, was Elias Henderson. He looked older now than he had an hour ago, his face drawn with guilt. "Miss Thorne?" he said, his voice quiet. Aaliyah turned from the window. "Yes." Henderson shifted uncomfortably, clutching his rolled-up Wall Street Journal like a shield. "I just wanted to apologize." Aaliyah frowned slightly. "You didn't do anything." "Exactly." Henderson said, a bitter edge to his voice. "I sat here. I listened to that woman speak to you like you were dirt. I saw the flight attendant abuse her power, and I did nothing. I buried my nose in my newspaper because I didn't want a scene." He looked down at his polished shoes. "I have a daughter about your age. If someone treated her like that, I would want someone to step in. And when your father walked on the way, he handled that. It made me realize what a coward I was being." Aaliyah looked at him. She wanted to be angry to tell him that his silence was just as bad as Beatrice's shouting, but she was too tired for anger, and his shame seemed genuine. "It's okay," Aaliyah said softly. "It's over now." "It's not okay," Henderson insisted. "But thank you for saying that. You have more grace than anyone else in this cabin, myself included." He nodded once and sat back down, looking miserable. While the first-class cabin stewed in silent reflection, the economy cabin was buzzing. The free drinks Marcus had promised hadn't started yet, but the gossip was intoxicating enough. Everyone had seen the tall man in the suit march to the back. Everyone had heard his proclamation. In row 12, seat F, a 22-year-old college student named Leo leaned back against the window. He was wearing an oversized gaming hoodie and had blue-dyed hair. He held his iPhone carefully below the seatback tray, replaying the video he had just captured. He had started recording the second Beatrix Vanderwall's voice had raised in the front cabin. He had caught the entire interaction with Sarah. He had filmed Aaliyah's sad walk to the back, and then he had caught the main event. Marcus Thorne boarding the plane, the look on Beatrice's face when the card dropped, the firing of Sarah, the banning. It was cinematic gold. Leo's thumbs flew across the screen. He opened TikTok. He uploaded the 3-minute clip. He added the caption, "Trout CEO Dad shuts down. Brush Karen on Aurora flight. Karma is swift. A Lee horn. Your justice served." He hit post within seconds. As the likes started rolling in, then the comments, then the shares, Up in the cockpit, Marcus Thorne sat in the jump seat behind Captain Miller, and the first officer, a young man named Davis. The mood up here was tense, but professional. Replacement cabin crew just pulled up to the jet bridge. Mr. Thorne, Captain Miller, reported, tapping his headset. "We should be ready to push back in 15 minutes. We'll be arriving in Zurich about 90 minutes late." "The time isn't a concern," Captain Marcus said, his voice calm over the cockpit noise. "Ensuring this airline understands its new operational standards is the concern." Captain Miller cleared his throat. "Sir, if I may speak freely, go ahead." "Mrs. Vanderwall, her husband's company, contracts dozens of international flights with us every month. And Sarah, the flight attendant, she was a senior union rep. This is going to be a logistical nightmare on the ground." Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up in the cramped space to stretch his legs. He looked out the windshield at the vast expanse of the airport. "Captain, I didn't buy Aurora Airways because I needed the money. I bought it because I needed the logistics for Thor Global's supply chain. This passenger side of the business is a luxury, and if it's going to run, it's going to run with integrity. If Mr. Vanderwaal wants to pull his contracts, let him. We'll fill the seats with people who know how to behave." And as for the union, Marcus's eyes hardened. The union exists to protect workers from unfair labor practices. It does not exist to protect bigots from the consequences of their own actions. "Sarah is gone. If they want to fight me on it, my legal team needs the practice." The cockpit door opened. A new flight attendant, a woman in her 40s named Maria, with kind eyes and a terrified expression, peered in. "Cabin is secure, Captain. Mr. Thorne, we are ready for departure." Marcus nodded at her. "Thank you, Maria. I trust this flight will be smoother than the start." "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir." She stammered, quickly closing the door. The plane finally pushed back. The engines roared to life, a deeper, more powerful sound than before. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Aaliyah felt the G-force press her back into seat 1. She watched the tarmac blur into grey streaks. As the nose lifted and the wheels left the ground, she felt a profound sense of release. They were in the air. They were untouchable. Down below, however, the world was just beginning to catch fire. While Flight 402 found its rhythm at 35,000 F cruising silently over the Atlantic, Beatrix Vanderwall was experiencing a rapid, turbulent descent into a personal hell right in the middle of JFK's Terminal 4. Elias had handed them over to Port Authority police, who, finding no physical violence to charge them with, had simply escorted the couple to the public landside terminal. They were dumped unceremoniously near baggage claim Carousel 3, surrounded by their pooled luggage. Beatrice sat on a hard plastic chair, her white faux fur coat gathered around her like armor. She was vibrating with indignation. "Can you believe the nerve?" She seethed aggressively, reapplying her lipstick to hide the tremor in her lip. "That man thinks he can treat me like this. I am a Diamond Elite member. Richard, call your friend at the airline. Get that little stewardess reinstated, and get this. This Thorne man sued for breach of contract." Richard didn't answer. He was standing 10 feet away, staring at his iPhone. His face was the color of old ash. "Richard," Beatrice snapped. "Are you deaf?" I said. "Call the VP of Operations. He's gone." "Beatrice." Richard said, his voice flat and dead. "What do you mean? Gone? Is he on vacation?" "Fired," Richard said, finally looking up. His eyes were wide with the terror she had never seen before. "I just got an alert. Marcus Thorne sent a memo to the entire company. A zero-tolerance policy. 4 executives were terminated 10 minutes ago for creating a culture of entitlement. Your friend was the first name on the list." Beatrice scoffed. "Ridiculous." "We'll sue. With what reputation?" Richard turned his phone screen toward her. It was tick-tock. The video was looping. It showed Beatrice looming over Aaliyah, sneering about the hoodie. It showed the moment Marcus Thorne dropped the card. It showed her humiliation. "It has 6 million views," B. Richard whispered. "It's been online for an hour. Airline Karen is the #1 trend globally." "So what?" Beatrice waved a hand dismissively. "Let the peasants talk." Richard's phone buzzed. He looked at the notification, and his knees seemed to buckle. He grabbed the handle of his suitcase to steady himself. "That was the board of directors," Richard said, his voice trembling. "They're invoking the morality clause in my contract. They're removing me as CEO effective immediately. Our stock dropped 4% since the video identified us." Beatrice froze. "They can't do that. They just did. And the Zurich partners, the deal that was going to fund our retirement." He laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. "They just pulled out. They said they don't do business with bigots. It wasn't bigotry." Beatrice shrieked, her voice echoing in the terminal. People turned to look. Phones came out. It was about seating priority. "It cost me everything," Richard spat. He straightened up, looking at his wife of 20 years, as if she were a stranger. "My career, my reputation, my retirement, all because you couldn't stand sitting near a teenager in a hoodie." He gripped his suitcase handle and turned away from her. "Where are you going?" Beatrice cried out, panic finally piercing her armor. "Richard, the limo is gone. How do we get home?" "I'm taking a cab to a hotel," Richard said, walking away without looking back. "I need to speak to a divorce lawyer before I speak to you again. Richard, you can't leave me here." But he did. Beatrice was left sitting on her pile of Louis Vuitton bags, alone in the busy terminal. A group of teenagers walking toward the exit slowed down. One of them pointed. "Hey, look," the girl whispered, loud enough to be heard. "That's the lady from the video, the one who got owned." They raised their phones. Cameras flashing. Beatrix Vanderval, the woman who had spent her life looking down on others, buried her face in her hands, weeping as the flashbulbs captured her final public ruin. The wheels of the Boeing 727 kissed the runway at Zurich Airport with a gentleness that felt like a sigh of relief. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was no longer tense. It was reverent. As the plane taxied to the gate, the new cabin crew who had spent the flight treating every single passenger from first class to row 45 with impeccable grace opened the doors. Marcus Thorne didn't rush off. He waited. He let the other first-class passengers gather their things. Elias Henderson, the businessman from 2A, stopped by seat 1A one last time. "Mr. Thorne Henderson," said, extending a hand, "you run a tight ship. I'll be moving my corporate accounts to Aurora. And Miss Thorne," he looked at Aaliyah, "keep drawing. The world needs more people who can see the beauty in things, even when things get ugly." Aaliyah smiled a genuine, tired smile. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson." When they finally stepped off the plane, the cool, crisp Swiss air hit them. But unlike the chaos at JFK, there was a sense of order here. A black Mercedes was waiting right on the tarmac, bypassing the terminal entirely. "No customs line today," Aaliyah teased as they climbed into the back of the car. "One of the perks of owning the airline." Marcus winked. "We cleared customs digitally while over the Atlantic. They were whisked away to the Dolder Grand, a castle-like hotel overlooking the lake. But the real destination was the gala that night. 6 hours later, Aaliyah stood in front of a full-length mirror. The hoodie and Converse were gone. She was wearing a stunning emerald green gown that shimmered under the chandelier lights. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant updo. She looked like royalty. "You look beautiful," Marcus said, stepping into the room. He adjusted his tuxedo tie. "Are you ready? It's going to be a lot of people, a lot of cameras." "I saw the news, Dad," Aaliyah said, turning to face him. "They're calling you the defender of the skies, and they're calling me." She paused. "They're calling me a symbol of dignity." "You are," Marcus said. "You didn't scream. You didn't fight dirty. You just held your ground. That takes more strength than what I did. All I did was use my wallet. You used your character." They arrived at the gala, a gathering of the world's elite. As they walked the red carpet, the flashes were blinding. But amidst the sea of reporters shouting questions about stock prices and mergers, one voice cut through. "Aaliyah Alia, what do you have to say to Beatrix van der Al?" Aaliyah stopped. The carpet went silent. Marcus looked at her, ready to intervene, but she shook her head slightly. She stepped toward the microphone. "I hope she finds peace," Aaliyah said, her voice clear and steady. "It must be very exhausting to carry that much hate around in your heart." "I don't carry it. I left it in row 34. The crowd erupted in applause. It was the sound of a reputation being cemented, not just as a billionaire's daughter, but as a woman of substance. Months later, the ripple effects were still being felt. Aurora Airways underwent a complete rebranding with a new motto, "Respect at every altitude." The training program was overhauled, with Marcus personally overseeing the curriculum. Sarah, the former flight attendant, never flew again. She found work as a receptionist at a dental office in New Jersey, where she spent her lunch breaks deleting hateful comments from her old social media accounts. She had learned the hard way that in the age of the internet, character is the only currency that matters. As for Beatrice, she vanished from high society. The divorce was messy and public. Stripped of her husband's money and her social standing, she was last seen moving into a small condo in Florida, far away from the private jets and galas she used to think were her birthright. But the most lasting image of that day wasn't the viral video or the headlines. It was hanging in Marcus Thorne's private office in Manhattan. It was a charcoal sketch framed in simple black wood. It showed the interior of a plain cabin. In the foreground, a girl sat with her head high. Behind her, a man stood like a guardian. And in the background, out the window, a storm was breaking, revealing a sliver of bright, unyielding sunlight. At the bottom, signed in small, neat script, were the words, "Seat 1 reserved for those who know their worth." Wow, talk about a satisfying ending. I think we can all agree that Aaliyah handled that with more class than most adults would have, and Marcus Thorne is officially the dad of the year. It just goes to show that money might buy you a first-class ticket, but it can't buy you class, and it certainly can't save you from karma when you mess with the wrong person. What would you have done if you were in Aaliyah's shoes? Would you have moved to the back, or would you have stood your ground? And do you think Beatrix's punishment was too harsh? Or did she get exactly what she deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We post new drama every single day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next.